often people don't bring it up because it's uncomfortable, it's tough, and they don't mean to offend you, but they don't know what to say. So just saying something as simply as, I'm thinking of you and you're a strong woman, or, you know, something like that, like just something simple. I think simpler is better.
This is Running for Real, the podcast for runners who know that for every runner's high, there are just as many lows. All those just missed PRs, easy runs that feel hard, injury blues, and more. Each week, we'll talk to running, health, and wellness experts about their highs, lows, and best advice to build our confidence. Running for Real is about being honest, being brave, and most of all, not feeling alone. And now here's our host, Tina Muir.
Hello, my friends. Welcome to episode 147 of the Running for Real podcast. This is episode 5 of the Beyond Running series. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm excited that you are here and thankful that you are interested in learning about these Beyond Running topics. These are things that are often ignored. They are things that make us feel a little bit uncomfortable, but they are things that we need to get better at addressing, because we are going to come into contact with people who are working through these things if we are not the ones working through them ourselves. And the better we can get at kind of being kind and understanding and thinking about how we are treating that person, the better it's going to make them feel. And often we care about them, so we want them to feel good. So hopefully these episodes are helping you. So far we have had anxiety disorders, visual impairments, suicide, disabilities, and this week is miscarriage. I hope these episodes are enjoyable for you to learn more and just get to know the people in the episodes, because they are wonderful people. I'm very selective about who I bring on this show. Now, today is a good friend of mine, Heidi Greenwood. You may remember Heidi from episode 9 of the Running for Real podcast. Heidi has experienced loss twice, and she's been so brave and vulnerable with her story. I know this is going to help so many people out there. If you feel comfortable, please consider sharing this. You never know who is going through this and who this could help. If you put these episodes out there, you might be making you might be making their day, their week, their month, their year, because someone is sharing, someone is saying, I get you, I hear you. So consider sharing these if you can. There are no sponsors for these episodes, but if you appreciate me and what I'm doing with these episodes, if you could support me on Patreon, I would really appreciate that. Patreon is a platform where you can give a small amount each month to just kind of support me, kind of like mostly for kind of musicians and artists and people who are creatives, but podcast kind of falls under that category. You get bonus episodes in there. You get the opportunity to ask guests your questions. And I will share extra things with you. And it just kind of shows that you appreciate me. Anyway, I don't want to go on too much about that. If you can't afford anything on Patreon, a iTunes review would also be very much appreciated. All right, so let's go meet Heidi. And we also have lots of links. Just before I forget to tell you that, there are links in the show notes if you want to go to any of the resources she mentions, or if you want to go find Heidi yourself. All right, let's go meet her and talk about miscarriage. Heidi, thank you so much for joining me today on the Running for Real podcast on this Beyond Running series. I'm excited to welcome you back. I haven't had many return guests on this podcast, so you are in a very select few. People may remember you from episode 9, if you can believe that, Heidi. You were episode 9, and this is, let me look, this is going to be 150. Oh, you're 150. Isn't that's a good number.
That's just kudos to you for crushing it.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's, I've been quite proud of myself for getting one out every single week. Even before I had Bailey, I was like, I literally had recorded 3 months in advance because I was so determined that I wanted to make sure I didn't miss a week. But either way, I'm excited to have you. And I don't know if you know this, Heidi, but your episode is the most downloaded of all time. So you have the most popular
incredible
episode. Yeah. So I want people to go back to that episode if they want to learn more about you and your journey, but maybe you could just give a kind of summary, like if you'd never met someone before. Who is Heidi Greenwood?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I grew up in a small town in northern Minnesota, playing all sports growing up. I was in volleyball, basketball, ran track. Then I went on to college. I went to the University of North Dakota, where I continued to play volleyball there and run track there. At the time, it was a Division II program. Now they are a Division I program. I guess my career highlights in college would have been I was an NCAA national champion at the 1500 meters in 2008. So my senior year there.
That was for a D2 school?
Yep. It was the last year, the University of North Dakota was in Division II. I
don't think I knew that.
I was UND's last Division II national champ ever in all sports. And so after college, I wasn't, I thought I would just run one marathon or so. And then I kind of got hooked after I ran one, and then I had qualified for the Olympic trials. And so I ran in the Olympic trials in 2016 for the marathon. So yeah, that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Yeah. Well, thank you for explaining that. And that's interesting. I am going to have a conversation with you about some other things related to that 1500, as I'm really curious about that, because I would have been in school at the same time at a D2, but somehow I never knew that. But thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, so as I mentioned, I had you on episode 9, and at the time, we brought you on to talk about, we were talking about amenorrhea, we were talking about kind of getting your health back, you and I both being in situations where we were running at the elite level and deciding to kind of make a change to allow us to start a family. Now, at that point, you had suffered a loss of your daughter, Jules, and it was a very emotional, heart-wrenching episode. You were so brave, and just it made me love you even more, Heidi. And then after that, you had suffered your second loss, losing Leni. And so, that's the reason for those listening. I really think Heidi is you were the only person I wanted to bring on to talk about this topic, because I think you don't only understand it, you've been through it in a very, very tough situation, but you share your heart, you're very open and honest, and I think that's what we need with a topic like miscarriage. So for those listening who've never really been around this, and I have to admit, I don't know if it was just no one ever told me, or we're going to get to this later, no one ever said anything. But until I started thinking about having a child myself, it didn't really even enter my mind, miscarriage, loss, any of that. I hadn't even thought about it. I'd never spoken to anyone who had mentioned it. So explain to us the difference between what is miscarriage, what is loss, what is stillborn. Kind of explain those things to us for those who've never heard of it before.
Sure. And Tina, I was the exact same boat as you, as far as like, that hadn't even crossed my mind. Like, why don't you just tell the whole world you're pregnant right away when you find out you're pregnant? Like, the thought of losing the baby was never even a thought. So I guess, terminology is terminology. If we just want to call it, it's all loss, it's all heartbreak. But typically when people are talking about miscarriage, it's anything, a loss of a baby or a fetus, before 20 weeks of gestation. And then after 20 weeks is when they start calling it the loss of stillborn, or even just a loss. Sometimes women can go into labor early, for whatever reason, complications. You just go into labor at a very early time, and then sometimes the baby just, can't make it. It's not big enough. It's not strong enough, or for whatever reason. And so that you could just call it a loss, your loss of your baby. So whatever you feel comfortable using as a person, I don't really think we do need to get totally hooked up on the terminology of it, other than the fact that it's a loss and it's heartbreaking.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I know you know this, but like, you as a friend, kind of seeing you not only go through this, but be brave and share about it was just, I felt it so deep in my heart in a way I've never felt about anyone or anything before, like seeing you kind of, fight through that heartbreak. And just for those listening, can you share with us about Jules and Leni, like when that happened? And at the time after
Sure.
Jules, you were kind of doing some digging, but what did you find after that?
Yeah, so our first pregnancy with Jules, we lost her at 22 weeks. She had a condition called anencephaly, or sometimes it's referred to as acrania. So her brain did not develop. So it's the worst form of a neural tube defect, and the condition is not compatible for life outside of a mother's womb. So she was born at 22 weeks. And then after that, we did find out that I'm a carrier, a double carrier for a gene mutation, which is quite controversial in medicine right now between, Western medicine and naturopathic medicine on the relevance of it. It's the MTHFR gene mutation. So I am a carrier of that. So I did take a medical dosage, what they call medical dosage. So a lot of folate in my next pregnancy, before I actually conceived our next daughter, Leni. And then she was forming, everything was going along perfectly. She, was hitting all her growth marks and what she needed. And then at 28 weeks, I just felt like she wasn't moving as much, and I got very worried, obviously. And then I went in and I had found out that she had passed away inside of me at 28 weeks. And so then I gave birth to her a couple of days later, or I think it was just like the next day, actually. So it was just like, it was the whole losses is kind of like, you still don't even believe that that's really happened to you in your life. And like, how do you get struck by lightning twice? Basically, how I like to describe it. It's like just unbelievable. Something like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
And so then after that, in our next we did go get a couple different opinions, like going forward, and we found an aggressive approach, I would call it, where I also started taking blood thinners, Lovenox shots daily in our third pregnancy to see if that could help. And, we were able to have a healthy baby, and she was born. We were induced at 37 weeks with Quincy, our third daughter, since I think they like to do that a lot when you're taking blood thinners, just to kind of control the delivery, just so they know, you can stop it at the right time. Yeah. But with Leni, they didn't really find anything wrong with her. They did find some blood clotting in her heart. And, was that the cause of her death, or did those form after she passed? It's kind of hard to know. And if you talk to different doctors, they might say different things. And so we aren't really quite sure what happened, other than that they did find that in her autopsy.
And do you find that you did go into this kind of mad panic of, I need to figure out what happened here? Like, does it kind of almost border on obsession that I need to know the truth? Like, I need closure, kind of.
Yeah. I did a ton of digging, and I read a lot on, I don't know if people are familiar with Dr. Ben Lin. She's like a naturopathic doctor that he studies MTHFR gene mutation at length, and he really believes it's a very significant thing, and thinks in 10 years it could possibly be identified as a blood clotting factor and disorder. And so I searched high and low, and I think that's just our human nature of wanting answers of like, how can this randomness, like this sad randomness happen to us? It's just like so unfair. And so we just want a reason. And I think we want a reason because then if we can have a solution, so we can feel comfortable with like going forward, other than feeling like, oh, let's just shake the dice again and see if a better results happens. Like that's really hard to take, with, let's try this again and see if it works out for the third time. Like, are you kidding me? Like that's pretty hard to, put yourself through, your family, through the people that support you. Like, I feel like when Quincy was born, everyone like took a a deep breath and was like, thank God, because you just have this like support network. Sorry, I'm like getting emotional.
Oh, no.
That like, that like wants, that like wants this positive outcome just as bad as you do. So yeah.
Thank you, Heidi. And as our listeners can tell, this is still so fresh to you. And I want to talk about, the fact that it isn't with grief. It isn't ever a kind of case of you just move on and it goes away. It is with you. And I want to talk about that in a little bit more detail, like just how you kind of learn to find your life again, find joy again. But before we get to that, I just want to ask you, for those listening, just how common is this for someone to have a loss? As I know you have done the research on this.
Yeah. So one in 4 pregnancies end in what they call miscarriage. In stillborns, like Leni, it's like 1 in 160, I believe is the stats.
Okay. That's still actually quite high.
Yeah. And then Jules, our first daughter with anencephaly, that's like, I even forget the stats now, but it's like, it's really very, very rare, in that actually happens.
Yeah. And that's so hard that you had both of those. And for those listening, and I know you thought about this after Jules, I don't know about Leni too. I would imagine you probably knew better at this point, but for those listening who are worrying about, is anything they are doing, what causes it? Can running make it worse if you run too hard? Is there anything we do? What did you find on that? I did run quite a bit in my first pregnancy, and I think that's human nature, that us moms that go through miscarriage and loss, we blame ourselves and question if what we were doing is safe. My doctors really, tried their best to make me feel that, it wasn't anything I did and that I was being safe. I think it comes down to like, what do you personally feel safe doing? And it doesn't cause more anxiety and stress. Okay.
So in my next, my other pregnancies, like I was still active. And, with everything my doctor said, I was very open. I'm like, this is what I'm doing. Like, is this okay? What are your thoughts? And like, they gave me, all like the go, or like if I should dial it back or whatnot. And, I shared way less, more publicly about like what I was doing with my activity levels, because I felt like I didn't want people to judge me and think like, oh, she's, like, look what she's doing. Like, is that safe? And like questioning what I'm doing rather than like listening to what my doctor said and like following through with what I feel comfortable doing. So yeah, I did less like intensity, you could say, but I was doing things that mentally made me feel comfortable and made me feel that I was being healthy for both me and my baby.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for explaining that. And, it is kind of sad that we are in a place where we feel that judgment maybe from other people, that it causes us to change our own behaviors, even if that doesn't kind of line up, or even if it's, just you sharing or not sharing for that matter. Yeah. But for someone who hasn't had a miscarriage, maybe is pregnant for the first time right now, like is it, from what I have heard and what I've read, like having a miscarriage, having a loss is kind of essentially a lot of the times out of your control. It's not anything to do with if you push yourself too hard running, you're going to cause it. What have you found about that?
Yeah. From my understanding, I'm not a doctor or anything, but it's like lots of times it's like chromosomes that like didn't match up correctly. And it's just some thing with the baby that when the DNA was matching up, it didn't match up, in the way that it should. And like, cause there's actually some research and newer research that's coming out on exercise and pregnancy where like, they don't even want women to like, they don't even think women need to monitor their heart rate. And they think that you can work out at really pretty high levels, through pregnancy. Like, there's been some pretty interesting studies out with that. But so, I mean, I would just talk with your doctor. And what were you doing before exercise, or like before you became pregnant, like trying to like, you know, be as like where you were at and not doing anything outside of your comfort zone. I actually also, because I was so cautious and I cared so much about doing the right things, which I think we all do, but being, I'm a personal trainer. I also got a certification in a pre and postnatal class with like exercise, like during pregnancy, and just so I could be as educated as possible on like, what are the safe things? What are the questionable as far as like strength training goes with like flexion and like, and those things. So that made me feel more comfortable in the activity that I was doing during my third pregnancy.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Heidi. All right. I just want to say to anyone listening, this is not supposed to be an educational lesson on miscarriage or loss, or we're not, as Heidi said, she's not a scientist, neither am I. I wanted this episode to be more focused on the emotional side of things for people who are going through it or know someone who is going through it, to be able to hear someone else talking about it. So that's what this is. I just want to clarify that like Heidi and I can talk about these things, but I'm just kind of leading into, we're going to get to this kind of emotional part of it. So let's talk about that. I mentioned earlier about like the grief. Maybe explain to us for people maybe who have suffered a miscarriage and they feel like they can't move on. They can't let go. Maybe it happened just a few days ago or a few weeks, but they feel like they can't move on. What would you say there?
I would say that grief is so individual and personal to yourself and your situation and how you deal with it. I would say like, don't discount it and don't let anyone else like tell you or belittle the feelings that you are feeling, because what you are feeling is valid and it is real. And I would recommend talking to someone that you know, a trusted source that maybe has gone through it. Maybe there's a counseling service. My husband and I used counseling after our second loss, and it was just like a service through our church. So it was like, you know, free. It didn't cost anything, but it was someone that we could talk to. So I think being able to like verbalize and talk about it is so healthy. There has, in the area I live, there's a nonprofit group that started called Hopeful Heart Project. And they're just a group of moms that have experienced loss. And they also work with fathers and so families, but we have events where we get together and we can talk and share about our situations. And it's so healing. You know, it's like going to, I don't know, like, a grief class, but it's like just in the most comforting way where everyone relates and like everyone gets it and knows that feeling. So that's what I would recommend is like reaching out and not thinking you have to like keep your thoughts only in your journal, like, which could be fine. You know, maybe that does work for you, but in my experience, I feel like it's just so helpful to talk to someone about it.
Absolutely. And I will put links, by the way, to anyone listening for any resources or anything Heidi and I mentioned in this episode. So be sure to go check out the show notes. Now, what about for family and friends? Family and friends who maybe know that someone is, you know, grieving, really having a hard time. What should they do? Should they not do around that situation and around that person, maybe in the early stages, and then kind of, you know, a few months later when they come into contact with them?
So I would say like, sometimes we try to think of like, that we think we need to say these elaborate things to them when really I think it's just so important to tell the other person that like you're thinking of them. And like, you don't have to try to be like, well, at least it wasn't, you know, when you were full term, or at least like a person that has had a loss, they don't want to hear like, at least. That's like the worst thing you could say, because you're like belittling the like, you know, telling them like it's not a big deal. So I think just saying like, I'm thinking of you and your baby, you know, down, you know, a month later, if they had given the baby a name, you know, you could say, like, I was thinking of Jules yesterday when the sun was setting, or like using their name, I always thought was so touching. And it is really touching bringing it up, because when people like ignored and don't say anything, you feel like it didn't matter to them. But often people don't bring it up because it's uncomfortable. It's tough, and they don't mean to offend you, but they don't know what to say. So just saying something as simply as, I'm thinking of you and you're a strong woman, or, something like that. Like, just something simple. I think simpler is better.
Okay. So you mentioned saying the at least thing, but you mentioned a lot of people kind of avoid the subject, avoid even mentioning it. And actually that kind of reminded me of a few weeks ago in the second episode of this Beyond Running series, Rich Hunter talked about being a visually impaired person, and how people will like cross the street to avoid coming into contact or having to kind of engage with someone who is walking along with the white cane. So it's kind of a bit like that. But for someone who is nervous, like I don't want to put my foot in my mouth, I don't want to make it any worse. What are some other things that, you've kind of said what they can say, thinking about that, but, maybe what are some other things that they can keep in mind not to say, in addition to like at least?
Like say another thing, well, something was wrong with your baby anyways. Like, ouch. That's not very, that's not very, heartwarming. So I would just focus on the positive. And if you are not comfortable, like verbally saying something to someone that you love, do a nice gesture for them. Like something like, send them a card in the mail and write them, say, I love you, or like send them flowers, just some, a gesture that's like you care. Maybe buy them a cup of coffee and then put their baby's name on it in the cup or something, just something that where you're showing that you care. I think that's like, very, very, like touching, very, very powerful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I don't want to like go there. I mean, you can go on websites and say like 10 things you shouldn't say to a mother. And there's actually some really good things to read through. If you do lose, there are some great resources out there that I would just links. Point people towards that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, so you mentioned there about like the cup of coffee thing. For someone who's thinking, I wouldn't want to do that because isn't that rubbing salt in the wound? Like, what would you say back to that?
No, I would say that's like I would say that's like wrapping your arms around them and saying, I love you.
Okay.
Like, I think that's just saying like, yeah, I'm thinking about you and I want to do something to show you it. And so it's just like a simple gesture.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. So the reason that this is such a like tricky subject to kind of negotiate when you're someone who hasn't kind of been through it or known anyone who's been through it is because it is not talked about. You mentioned earlier about you couldn't understand why people didn't just announce their pregnancy immediately. And it has become, I think that is the primary reason that people don't say about being pregnant until usually that 12-week mark. But, why is it that people don't talk about it? In your kind of opinion, what you've experienced, and should we speak more about it? Like what have you found healing through talking about it?
I don't know. Like it's interesting because it's like our social like standards of not announcing your pregnancy until you're 12 weeks. And I like, why do we even think that? Or like, you know what I mean? Like, so you're telling someone that if they have a miscarriage at 10 weeks, like they shouldn't tell anyone. Like that's still sad. It's still a loss. Like, I don't know. How do you change the like social, like culture in a way? That's probably not the right terminology, but
I guess the point.
Yeah. I don't know.
So we should, like, from you having been through this.
I feel like some people are more open about it. So say, for example, I am a pretty open person and like wear my heart on my sleeve. But what I did find out is after going through my losses, my third pregnancy, like I kept really close to my heart. And I think it was just because it wasn't so that, I didn't want to like tell the world that I was pregnant or, you know, I would say like, I felt like I was going to jinx myself. Like I just wanted to like keep it to myself and like, and I didn't know if really the real reason was I was just so deathly scared of like another loss that I didn't know how I would deal with it. And that like me personally feeling like a failure and that it was like my fault, even though, you know, we know that it's not.
Yeah.
So I did. Yeah. So like with my first pregnancy, we announced at 12 weeks. My second pregnancy, we announced, you know, at like 20 weeks. And then my last pregnancy, we never even made an announcement. Some people didn't even know I was pregnant until we had given birth. And, you know, unless if you interacted with me on a daily basis, then you obviously physically would have seen I was pregnant.
I remember seeing a photo of you and you'd cut it off like perfectly. And I was like, she's definitely like, because you'd cut it off like just below your boobs. And I was like, there's definitely like the way she's cut that photo. It was, but yeah, like I was obviously kind of, you know, you're a friend of mine and I was, you know, rooting for you for everything to be smooth and you be able to give birth and have a healthy, happy baby. But I remember seeing that and yeah, it was pretty far along. You were probably only a few weeks away at that point. So I think that was at Thanksgiving, the photo you're talking about. So, and then we had her at Christmas. So, so, you know, I was like wondering, you know, to myself, like, oh, like if we were able to become pregnant again, like how would I deal with that? Would I feel comfortable telling people early on, or am I going to like want to keep it close to home? Like just with, cause I don't know if that's a common, you know, that'd be a good poll question, I guess, like in the loss community of like how like comfortable women feel after a loss, like announcing their next pregnancy. Like, is that pretty common? Like, is it a protective mechanism? I don't know. Yeah. But that's what I had chose to do. And that's what I felt most comfortable with. I didn't feel comfortable doing this big, like an announcement telling people that I was pregnant with Quincy. Just, I didn't feel, I think, cause you're just so scared and not trusting your own body with being able to keep this baby alive. And so we just kind of try to keep it quiet, I guess. Absolutely. And so for people listening who, you know, have been through it, haven't said anything, they say, you know, it's going to be too painful to tell people about it. Like it's going to crush me. Or maybe they don't tell family and friends for the 12-week mark even because they don't want to have to explain if something does happen. But would you kind of argue for the other side that those people who love you and care about you the most, if you do experience a loss, those are the people you want around you? And yes, you might have to tell them, but they can then be there for you. Like, what is your thoughts on people who are worried about saying anything because they feel like it'll be too painful to tell their loved ones?
Yeah. I personally feel like you would have to not that sounds kind of, but I mean, walking through a loss by yourself, I can't imagine how dark that must feel and how cold that must feel when you don't have anyone that can wrap their arms around you other than maybe your spouse. So I feel like you would surely want to tell someone that you love, like whether it be a sister, you know, a mother, you know, just a very trusted person that could help you with whatever the good Lord throws your way. Like, you know, we don't know what's going to happen in the future. There's no guarantees with anything. And I feel like having that support system is so important. So maybe you don't do like a public announcement, you know, but you tell the people close to you that are going to be there for you, that can help you through those tough times.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. So then you mentioned, you know, how scared you were that it would happen again and you wouldn't be able to carry a baby to term. But during those kind of panicked moments, you know, knowing that stress isn't good for you or the baby during like its growth, what did you tell yourself to ease your mind? What did you do to kind of allow yourself to keep living life during pregnancy?
I did a lot of like journaling. I believe in God, so I like would, devotional type things. I also found it very therapeutic to do like gentle meditation, yoga, where it's just, about having the body relaxed, and the breath just really helped relieve tension. So that was helpful for me. My doctor was on board with, like, we did a lot of monitoring with our third baby. So I actually had two appointments every single week since week 26. So they were doing non-stress tests and actual biophysical profiles of the baby. And for me, those doctor's appointments were super, super helpful. And that helped me feel at ease that, okay, I got to check in, I got to see her, and like, she's doing good. Some people, it might create more anxiety going in, but for me, it really helped me. Like, it was like, oh, I just need to make it 2 more days and then I can check in again. So I looked forward to my doctor's appointments, because it was like another, token in the yes bucket. Like, we're getting closer. Like, she's doing fine. She's doing fine. And there was a couple of times when there were things that maybe like I stayed a little bit longer because, maybe I was feeling a little more anxious about something, and that's fine if they're okay monitoring the baby longer. So I think it's really about finding a doctor that is really on your team and it really cares. And, you're an individual person. You're not just a chart number to someone. I think that's really important to find a situation that you feel very connected to your doctor and that you trust them.
Great. Thank you. And then what about did you find yourself avoiding social situations because you didn't want people to ask about it or kind of be awkward around you? Or what about if someone feels like they just, they don't want people to say something that's going to trigger them. They don't want to, start crying. How would you suggest they maneuver through that?
Yeah. Right after the losses, in that first month to 6 weeks, it's tough. It's hard to go to public situations, when maybe someone didn't even see, maybe they're not friends with you on Facebook and they didn't see that you lost the baby, and they see you and all of a sudden, you were 28 weeks pregnant. Now, you're not pregnant at all. Where's your baby? That's very, very difficult situation. And that's reality for some women, that do experience that. So, it's tough. I say it's like a transition back into society, because that's, the world keeps going. You don't really move on from your loss, but you learn how to you become stronger in handling the grief in better ways. So it's kind of it's always there, but you as the mom of this lost baby, you're just a stronger woman, and you just can handle it with more grace, and you become better at vocalizing and verbalizing when people ask you those tough questions. A tough question that I still get to this day is when people ask, how many children do I have? Or Quincy must be your first. Those are very difficult questions to answer. And I still stumble sometimes. Sometimes I give someone a different answer. It depends on how deep do you want me to go into this conversation? Because to me, Jules and Leni, they are my first 2 daughters. And I don't want to say Quincy, Quincy's my first daughter. Well, she's not, so it's kind of it's a tough question, but that's one that I still get that's hard to have an answer for.
So on that note, I've seen you write about this, about, having Quincy and people kind of seeing your life as well, now you've had Quincy, you can move on, you can forget about, Jules and Leni and kind of move on. But, I see that you still celebrate their birthdays, and I think maybe you celebrate another day. You'll have to tell me what that is. But what about, for people who don't quite understand that just because you have now, you have got Quincy now, it doesn't mean that you kind of, reset and say, okay, now I just have her, that I get, I have what I want, kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really up to like the individual mother, how she wants to approach that. But like I want to talk to Quincy about her sisters and share that with her. Like somebody else might choose to do it a different way, and that's totally okay. It's really what makes your heart feel full at the end of the day. Your heart feels full in an empty situation, because your losses do definitely, leave holes in your heart, and you just kind of learn how to go forward with it. So it is hard, and you do feel like sometimes people like, oh, she's happy now, move on. But there are days when you like are holding, like I am so lucky that I do have Quincy, and you just have this sense of gratitude. And then you like sit there and you're like, oh my gosh, like Jules and Leni were just as precious. And like, so then you have like those emotions that go with it too. But we choose to share their birthdays and celebrate and make them a part of our life, because that's what I want to do and how I want to handle it. But each person can do whatever they're comfortable with.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Heidi. All right. So just to kind of finish up here, when I was kind of doing research for this, I was reading an article about some feelings that women may experience. So I'd like you to maybe say what your response to someone would be if they are, and we'll start with feeling like alone, like no one understands. What would you say to them?
I would say there are people that understand, and that to try to connect with those. So they're a really good resource. There's tons of like Facebook groups, support groups online if you search, and you can get accepted into where they're just people that have experienced similar things. So you're not alone, and that you should talk to someone, a trusted source, or someone that that has gone through it. Once you start talking and sharing your experience with others, it's kind of weird, because I would say people come out of the woodwork, so to speak, that they'll be like, oh yeah, that happened to me. And then you have these people that you can talk to. So I think just being able to talk about it's important. Okay. And you're going to find more support is there than you realize.
Definitely. Thank you. All right. What about, we've talked about blaming already, but what about just feeling numb?
I'm not like a grief counselor or anything, but I think that's just, grief showing its way, and it's hard. We just turn off our feelings when we're feeling hurt, so we don't have to deal with it. So I would say just like, again, talking to someone and finding a person that you can share with, because the more you open up and talk about it, I feel like that numbness goes away. Yeah. Not totally, but it'll give you some relief. Yep.
And then this last one, it might be the same kind of situation here, but for someone who feels like, is it normal? I feel like everyone else wants me to move on and I don't feel like I'm ready.
Yeah. So that's a great question. Like, you do not have to feel like you need to move on. This is obviously my opinion. But I think there is this pressure where you feel like people are like saying, all right, get over it. Like, that was 6 months ago, that was a year ago, or get over it. You have your baby now. Like, stop talking about your other babies that didn't make it. So like, I think, like, again, you'll find through your own experience and journey, and how people perceive it maybe is a good way to think about it. And to stop, and like how I have gotten better at dealing with it personally. Like, I feel so much stronger, and like, I don't really care what people think if they, like, oh, why did she put a picture of, her baby that passed away? That's creepy. I don't want to see a picture of a baby that has passed away. And to me, like, I think it's beautiful, and it's my daughter, and I want the world to see her, and because that's, what I have. And so I think like, whatever makes you feel happy, like, you be you be a strong woman. Like, I think that's like my best advice is to do your best to stop worrying about what other people think about. And it's like a learning thing. I think it's like a skill. Don't you think, Tina? Like,
yeah, absolutely.
Because we judge, like in all things in life, like does she think I'm doing this wrong, or is whatever? It's like getting to a point where you're comfortable in your own skin and forgetting what other people think or judging, and just saying, I'm doing me, and that's that. And I'm going to celebrate how I want to celebrate. And if other people think it's weird, who cares?
Absolutely. I could not agree more. And thank you so much for saying that, because I think more and more people need to hear that I'm getting so much better at it as well. So, with whatever it may be. So hopefully more people can listen to this and be able to do that in whatever that looks like for them. All right, Heidi, just as we have not talked about running at all in this episode, but you do have quite the running story that I will have people go listen to in episode 9. There will be lots of links in the show notes of resources that Heidi's given me and other information for anyone to go get. You can get that at tinamuir.com/episode 150. But Heidi, just to wrap up with 2 of our running for real questions, can you give us one piece of advice you'd like to give the listeners for life?
For life?
Yeah.
I would say, this is a tough question. Just something about like your relationships and filling up your relationships, because you need to have a close friend in life. It makes life so much more rewarding and fulfilling. So putting effort and time into like relationships into your life.
Yes. Good advice. Thank you. That's great. I haven't had anyone say that. Love that. All right. And finally, a running for real moment, something that only runners will understand.
I probably said this on your podcast the last time, but going to the bathroom in the woods. Because all runners, we are out in nature, and we sometimes have to go when you're out there for long periods of time. So running for real moment would be, I'll say proudly that I have gone to the bathroom in the woods a lot.
Love it. And I think we all have, so nothing wrong with that at all. All right, Heidi, where can people find out more about you? And if someone is working through a loss, is it okay if they reach out to you? And if so, what is the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to help someone if they're going through this and need someone to talk to at any point in, conceiving or after conception, with struggles in all areas. So you could reach out to me on Instagram, send me a private message, or email to Tina. I can give you my email. It's do you want me to say it, or if you want
I'll just put it in the show notes if people want to go get it.
Okay. Yeah. So look at my Instagram. Instagram is probably the best way to get a hold of me.
And what is your Instagram handle?
It's Joe Greenwood.
Yeah.
Okay. Or no, I don't even know what it is. Or is it Heidi Joe Green?
I think it is H. Joe. We'll have a link in the show notes for anyone to go get.
Okay, I'm sorry. I don't even know what my Instagram handle is.
It's all right. No worries. Okay. Heidi, thank you so much for opening your heart, for being brave and honest. And I just look up to you so much. So thank you for doing your part to kind of bring awareness and bring comfort to so many. And I'm sure there will be so many more out of this. So thank you so much for all that you do.
Yeah, thank you very much.
My friends, if you have a minute and you could leave a review on your favorite podcast player, Apple Podcasts, aka iTunes, Stitcher, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Spotify, or whatever else podcast player you use to listen to this podcast, or if you would subscribe to this podcast, you will help me get out in front of new runners to make our tribe even bigger and even better. It might not seem like you as one person can make a difference, but really it helps a lot. And it shows me you appreciate the hard work I put in for those. Thank you so much. My friends, if you are someone who is going through the loss of a child, going through that grieving process, I hope that was soothing for you. And Heidi will be a source of comfort for you if you need it. Send me an email and I will connect you to her if you want it. My email is tina@tinamuir.com. That's TINA@TINAMUIR.com. And I will connect you to Heidi. If not, I hope you learned a lot and you now know what to do if a friend has experienced loss and if they are brave enough to share it with you, and how you can make her feel loved, appreciated, and just kind of help her through this really tough time. Now, I will mention again, there's no sponsors for this episode. If you want to support me on Patreon, I would really appreciate that. You can find that at patreon.com/runningforreal with the number 4, or you can leave me an iTunes review if you feel like doing so. I would really appreciate that too. Now, next Monday on this Beyond Running series, we are covering athletic asthma, which is a topic I knew very little about, but is more common than we realize, as are other breathing problems, which it was really an enlightening episode for me, so I hope you will enjoy it as much as I did. But on Friday, I will see you for an episode with Nelly Acevedo. Until then, have a great week.
Thanks for listening to the Running for Real podcast. Be sure to check out tinamure.com for show notes and even more helpful running information.